Hey guys, bit of a more informal one today. I just kind of wanted to sit down and talk about my favorite format, draft, and sort of just why it seems like the vast majority of TCGs don't seem to really partake in the greatest format of all time, and sort of the things that are preventing other games from engaging with it. Basically, we all know what draft is. You clicked on this video, you know what draft is. I'm not going to do the whole spiel. If you want the spiel, go Google it. Let's start with why I like draft. Why is draft my favorite format? And again, I'm just going to steal Gavin Verhey's top 5 reasons why. I think they're great, and they highlight a lot of the format's strengths in a pretty concise manner. The first point is just new cards. Everyone likes opening packs and getting new cards, and you get to do that as part of the format. So I guess you can say a huge strength is just by playing the format, you get new cards. You also get new cards without having to win them, which can be nice. Number 2 is that draft has a strong focus on the fundamentals of a game. When you're playing a format with mostly commons and rares, you have to leverage a game's systems more than the actual text on the cards themselves. This means that you have to engage with the game on just a more fundamental level, which can help you just be a better player. The decisions you make in lower powered formats like this are different than the decisions you make when you're playing with the strongest cards that are available to you. A good example is in games like Magic, the things that matter most on your cards is their text and what they do, whereas in draft, it can often be more the case that the stats of your cards are more relevant than the text on them. You get to learn a lot of a game's fundamentals. Like Magic, draft teaches you a lot how to get value out of combat, something you just otherwise wouldn't learn in another format like Commander, for example. There's a stronger focus on like resource gameplay because your resources are so limited. Every card you play matters a lot more, so being able to actually accrue card advantage is extremely valuable. Cards with mana abilities are a lot more powerful in draft because just having something that you can spend mana on late in the game once you've exhausted a lot of your cards in hand can oftentimes just lead to a victory. This also teaches players like strong card evaluation skills, something very necessary for deck building and constructed. It can be really hard to tell what makes a card good when you're just kind of like jamming all of the best high rarity ones. Playing a more limited format where you have to actually evaluate commons and rares against each other kind of shows you exactly what makes cards strong versus what makes them not so great. The third point is new deck ideas. Not only does drafting help you kind of come up with ideas for new constructed decks, like, hey, I drafted this bomb rare and it was really fun. What are some other cards I can pull from other sets to really strengthen this thing and make it constructed viable? But drafting also helps you familiarize yourself with a set in its entirety instead of just like sitting at your computer and just reading every card verbatim. It can become really hard to internalize a lot of knowledge and like aspects of how certain cards work by just reading them. Actually getting to play with them and have them interact with other cards in the set teaches you a lot about how the set works in a more dynamic way, and really just serves as a more natural introduction to the set than just, again, reading it on your screen. The fourth point is that it promotes a more even playing field. It takes actual skill. If you want to be a spike at draft, you don't really just get to walk up with whatever the community has determined to be the best cards in a given format. This also helps for more lower skilled players or people with lower powered decks where they don't have to worry about just getting blown up by whatever the best deck in the format is. A lot more games are determined by your knowledge of the fundamentals and then the skills that you brought to the actual draft and your ability to construct a properly functioning deck. A skill that you can take with you to constructed to build better constructed decks. Something that can be really hard to do just kind of on your own for the first time. And the fifth point is variety. I know a lot of people like to just jam the same strategy over and over again, and that can be a huge benefit of constructed, but for me, and other people that spend their entire days just kind of stuck in UVS Ultra deck building constantly, draft is really fun because you get to build a new deck every single time you play it as part of the gameplay. You can also use it as a way to like live tinker with strategies that you've theorized in your head. Basically, draft is cool because, you get new cards, but it teaches you a game's fundamentals and introduces a lot of skills that you can take with you to constructed, like deck building and card evaluation, and being able to understand a game on a more fundamental basis is always helpful. So if draft is so great, then why don't more games do it? And to start on a more just like broad topic, we need to kind of talk about the difference between card games in Japan and the rest of the world. You'll notice that almost every game made in America has a very strong focus on draft. Games like Magic the Gathering and Star Wars Unlimited, and even games made outside of America like Flesh and Blood. A lot of this is probably due to the fact that a lot of the designers that work on these games are mostly former Magic bros who understand draft to be an integral and key part to a game's competitive environment. But you'll notice that pretty much no Japanese game actively supports draft as a game mode, like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, Cardfight Vanguard, any of the Bandai games. And a lot of this is really due to just the culture that surrounds Japanese card games. You see, in Japan, TCGs are a much more casual hobby. The best comparison would be like your average dad that golfs on the weekend. That's your average Japanese TCG player. And this casualness is pretty much across the board. Like, even their tournaments are casual. Most of them are best of one, and you can only enter the tournament based on a lottery system. So like, if there's a regional coming up, it has so many seats, you kind of have to just spin a wheel to see if you can even get a ticket to participate in the first place. The problem is that draft is kind of an inherently skill testing format. That's one of like the main purposes behind its existence. So like, why would you draft in a best of one lottery tournament where people are kind of just showing up to play whatever decks they want to play? You see, draft is sort of meant to test your skill at a game as a whole. Like, if you want to play on the Magic the Gathering Pro Tour, you can't just be good at like a given Magic format, you have to be good at the entire game of Magic the Gathering. So draft is a prominent format played on the Pro Tour, much like standard and modern. A lottery style best of one tourney doesn't even really test a player's skill at constructed, so why would they introduce and design for a format that tests an entirely different skill? Japanese players already bring their Dark Magician decks to locals, so they don't really need a for fun format, and all of their competitive tournaments are inherently casual, so they don't really need a skill testing format either. The first skill a Japanese tournament tests is your ability to win a lottery draw to even be able to enter the tournament in the first place. So draft just like doesn't really have a home over there, but we're Americans, and Americans like money and winning. So we play for money and winning. So we have tournaments that are specifically designed to identify the best 8 players in a given room and throw them into a single elimination deathmatch. Draft allows us to identify players that are good at multiple aspects of the game. Like, the Magic the Gathering World Champion should be the best Magic the Gathering player, not the best 2026 standard format player. To that end, some people might say, does that mean that UVS needs to have retro as a competitive format? And to that I say no, because we're trying to identify the best UVS player, not the best UFS player. It's sort of like why there's no vintage Pro Tour. Like, that's kind of just a different game. Okay, so we've identified why most Japanese games don't draft, but why do some American games still not draft? And for that, I just want to talk about some more like specific reasons that can kind of hamper a game's ability to be drafted. And for that, we're primarily going to be talking about the games Flesh and Blood and Universus. One of them featuring draft as a main competitive format played on their Pro Tour, and the other one pretty much never being drafted ever at all. And I want to talk about that. So before we dive too deep into anything, I want to talk about how in my research, I found that UVS has a pretty massive fundamental pain point that until it gets addressed means that draft pretty much is unplayable for the foreseeable future. And that's that you need to draft with 6 packs. Typically you draft with 3 packs, but 6 packs is kind of just an unaffordable number. You really can't expect players to be down to buy 6 packs every week so they can just play draft. It's kind of a large investment. It's comparable to Sealed, a format where you also get 6 packs that you participate in quarterly. You only really do Sealed for pre-releases, which is right before a new set comes out. So unless you have a new set dropping every month, a la some other games, Sealed is this thing you kind of do only every so often. Expecting players to do that regularly to practice a competitive format is a little much. So until we either increase the pack size or find a way to draft with just 3 packs, unfortunately the format is kind of unreasonable. But that format's pretty solvable. I want to talk about more of those unique aspects that make some games very draftable and other games not so much. I like to use Flesh and Blood as an example because it is a game that on paper should not be draftable at all. Like, Magic the Gathering is a game that's great to draft because you can theoretically put any card you want into your deck. It's just that you need to add the appropriate amount of lands to be able to cast that spell. And you know, the more colors you try to play, the more thinned out your mana base gets and the more inconsistent your deck gets. So you're sort of incentivized to stick with a couple colors, but you can technically pick whatever color you want. Flesh and Blood is a game where all of your cards are locked to a specific class of hero. That means if you're drafting the game and you want to play, I don't know, Dorinthia, you're only allowed to pick warrior cards. So not only is this incredibly restrictive, so sometimes you might not even be able to draft enough cards to get a legal deck count, but also you don't really get to make a lot of decisions in the draft because you're only allowed to pick the warrior cards. So fundamentally, this should never work, but they found a way. It's a bit forceful, but they found a way. Using one of the more recent good draft formats, High Seas, they kind of fixed a lot of the problems by making the sets contain 3 characters, all of which having a primary class and then a more generic shared subclass. So in this example, the 3 characters are a necromancer, a ranger, and a mechanologist, but they're also all pirates. This means that if you're drafting a character like Gravy Bones, you will eventually have to start picking Necromancer cards, but if you want to stay open or flexible, if you pick a Pirate card, that card can fit in any of the 3 heroes. This combined with the generic cards in the set, which are cards that can go into any hero regardless of class, means you do have a little more flexibility in the kind of cards you want to play. Other sets have solved this problem by having multi-class cards, so a card can be both a warrior and a ninja card, and picking this doesn't really lock you into one class, but sort of more pivots you towards 2. This gives drafts a lot of inter-class flexibility. Something nice that High Seas also introduced was multiple builds of a given hero. Marlin, for example, has 2 different builds. One is a more red line variant, where you play a lot of aggressive red attacks, trying to string out a bunch of attacks over a course of a turn and kind of just blow your opponent up. And there's the more bigger blue harpoon version. This version plays a bit slower, focusing more on blues to set up giant expensive harpoon blasts. So now not only is picking your hero important, but deciding which weapon you want to go with and therefore which deck you want to build is also important. This made for one of the better, if not best, draft experiences in recent history. So if Flesh and Blood can solve its drafting problems, why can't UVS? Well, let's talk about the first thing that makes draft interesting, and that's the restrictions. Drafting in Magic is really cool and fluid because you're allowed to pick any card you want and put any card you want in your deck, but if you want a better deck, it's sort of good to stay around the limit of 2 colors. But which 2 colors you play is entirely up to you. This makes a lot of the skill in draft about reading signals and identifying which strategies are open and available for you to take. Magic Draft also gets a bit of a cheat code with lands. Because your deck needs to contain lands, you don't draft the lands, you add them to your deck afterwards. This means that your 40-card deck only actually consists of about 23 of the cards you drafted. Typically, you draft 3 packs of Magic the Gathering, which is around 14 cards, which means you're drafting about 42 cards on average, but only 23 of them need to be able to go into your deck. This gives you a lot of flexibility in the draft to start flexing into one color, realizing that color's not super available, and pivoting to another. Maybe you start picking a couple black cards, but suddenly all the black cards in the pack are gone. Someone down the line is taking them from you, and it's no longer open. But you got a really good white card passed to you. This means that the players down the line didn't take this really good white card, they're probably not drafting white, maybe you pick this white card and start pivoting more in that direction. Games like Flesh and Blood and Universus can be kind of tough because all of the cards you draft kind of comprise your deck. You don't have lands to kind of pad out the space. In Flesh and Blood, your deck is 30 cards, and you need to draft 30 playable cards. This can be kind of a tall order, with past formats having a lot of players not even hitting legal deck sizes. And this is a problem that UVS unfortunately faces as well. In UVS, you draft with 6 packs, which gives you effectively 60 cards to build your 40-card deck out of. But that gives you 20 cards to cut. So what's the problem? Let's look at UVS's version of Magic the Gathering's colors and Flesh and Blood's classes, the symbols. In Universus, the character you play as is typically going to have 3, sometimes 2 symbols. When you build a deck, you pick one of those symbols, and all of the cards in your deck must contain that symbol. The fun part is that the cards in your deck don't just have 1 symbol on them. They contain sometimes 2, but typically 3 symbols of their own. Not to mention these square symbols called attuned symbols, which can be put into your deck regardless of what symbol you choose to play on, provided that your character just has that symbol printed on it. This allows for a lot of flexibility in deck building. Obviously, your character's specific cards, or their kit, are going to have all 3 of your character symbols on them, letting you play these cards no matter what symbol you choose. You also have attuned cards, which also will be available to your character, no matter which symbol you choose. And then, based on the symbol you choose, you get access to, obviously, all of your character's kit, and then you get to flex into other characters' kits. If you decide to play Reina on the Chaos symbol, for example, you will also get access to all of the Mishima cards from Heihachi and Kazuya. Or you can play her on air and steal some of Hwoarang and Nina's cards. Now here's where I get stuck, because I've been told that it's quite difficult to draft a playable Universus deck, oftentimes with players not reaching the legal deck count. But honestly, the math isn't quite mathing to me. I don't know about y'all, but this spread of flexibility seems fine. And if you do stomach the 6-pack draft, you get access to 60 cards. Only 40 of them need to be playable. That gives you 20 cuts of flexibility. But even so, apparently it's still really hard to build a deck, and that's just math I'm gonna have to leave to the more experienced players. Maybe if I can find a way to convince 7 other people to sit down and draft some Tekken 8 with me, we can experience the math for ourselves firsthand. But until then, I'm just gonna have to leave it up to the more experienced players. So the question becomes, how do we solve this problem? Well, one solution players have had is that you can draft any card provided that it shares a symbol with your character. So instead of picking one symbol to build your deck on, you just build a deck out of all of the symbols that are on your character. The problem is this leads to a pretty big issue that we see in games like drafting Yu-Gi-Oh! In that when you can kind of pick any card in the pack, you just kind of slam the best ones. So for example, if you decide to play Reina on all 3 of her symbols, you get access to not only Reina's cards, but 6 out of the 13 other characters' cards, which means when you're drafting, you get to kind of just pick whatever cards you want from half of the available pool, which leads to players making not a lot of like specific draft decisions about signals and stuff, and kind of just playing draft the best card simulator, and you just kind of slam together a pile of good stuff. When you're forced to commit to a symbol, you have to make some pretty intentional decisions, but you still are offered a lot of flexibility. Like for example, you can slam any of your character's cards because it's on all of your symbols. You can pick any attuned card because that'll just work with your character no matter what. The only real decision you have to make is what symbol you're going to commit to, because that determines what cards you kind of get to just splash into your deck, right? Whose cards do you want to steal from? You also don't have to commit to a character super early. You're able to flex through a lot of different symbol combinations, only having to settle on a character once you find either a card that works super well with them, or you finally want to settle on a certain symbol. You can spend an entire draft picking up Reina cards, and then later on decide to switch to Kazuya once you find a really good Kazuya staple, being able to still play all of the Reina cards you picked so long as you stay on the Chaos symbol. Or maybe it's early on enough where you can just lob all the Reina cards to the side and play like Kazuya on Evil. So for me personally, I'm just kind of not really seeing where the math gets kind of icky, but when I did try to investigate this, I asked the question, are there any other sets that have similar symbol spreads to the new Tekken 8 set? 3 symbol characters with attuned cards in the set. And the answer was yes, there are 2. First off, the most recent set, Godzilla, and then a couple sets before it, the Critical Role set, Heroes of Exandria, or whatever it's called. And so I asked, those sets that have similar draft math, how are the draft formats for those sets? And the answer I was given was, no one really drafted those sets. So we don't know. So that's cool. So this is going to be a data point I'm going to have to come back to on just symbol math, but let's talk about deck size and being able to draft a playable amount of cards, because that's something we can actually, have data on. So for a lot of drafts, you kind of have to cut your main deck size down to a smaller number to facilitate your smaller access to playable cards. Magic, you go from 60 to 40, and in Flesh and Blood's case, they cut the deck size in half, from 60 to 30. Unfortunately, we probably can't cut Universus down from 60 to 30, because I think you'd probably just deck yourself with that little cards. We probably have to stick to 40. So we are kind of stuck in the situation of having to draft 40 playable cards from a given set of packs, and that's a lot. Other games can mitigate this, like Duel Masters, where you play any card as resource. So while you are forced to take some bad cards just to make your deck playable, those bad cards can get treated like automatic resources, where if you ever draw them, you just slap them down as a resource and you don't gotta worry about it. So while, yes, you are forced to take some bad cards to get your deck to a playable count, it's basically the same as putting a land into your deck, so it ends up not feeling that bad. But in games like Flesh and Blood and, UVS, where we don't just kind of throw any card as a resource, the cards in your deck need to be playable to at least some degree, and this can put a lot of strain on the drafter. But this is all to say nothing about UVS's second big draft pain point. That's the health pools are kind of too big. You see, UVS Limited sometimes has this problem of just not being able to kill people. This is because the common attacks are, typically weaker than the super rare attacks. And this leads to the common attacks just not having enough firepower to really kill full health size characters that are meant to be blown up with super rares. Now, Flesh and Blood has the same problem. In Flesh and Blood, your character has 40 health. The rares and majestics are designed to kill heroes with 40 health. The commons, not so much. This can make games take forever, and if you were to play a limited Flesh and Blood game with 40 health heroes, both players would probably just deck out before any meaningful amount of damage would ever be done. So, the Flesh and Blood solution to this was to print young versions of the heroes with half the health pool. By cutting the health total in half, this makes the commons sort of also retroactively scale in power level, making them feel as strong as a Majestic would in Constructed, except this time you're trying to kill someone with 20 health instead of trying to kill someone with 40 health. We unfortunately can't do this in UVS. In Flesh and Blood, pretty much all characters have 40 health except for some few minor exceptions, and most of them are wizards. But in UVS, it's pretty much all over the place and also determined by your hand size, which means you get characters ranging from 21 health all the way to like 35 health on a pretty regular and frequent basis. So while cutting 6 hand sizers in half from like 30 health to 15 health would make limited probably work a lot better, you would also probably completely kneecap any 7 hand sizer, taking them down from like 20 health to 10 health, making them probably just die immediately. You'd also have to like print very specific different draft versions of these characters somewhere, and they'd have to have specific health stats, like how do you cut a 21 health person in half, or maybe you develop some system to scale everyone down, but like that takes an incredible amount of balancing, and again, you'd have to print the unique versions of these guys, and typically they reserve the back of characters for tokens, so I don't think we can just print the young hero on the back half. It's just kind of like a messy thing, and I don't think is a really real solution to this problem, especially when this problem has an entire second half to it. If all of the attack power is consolidated in the high rarity cards, where is all the defensive power consolidated?
Six pack.
It's in the commons. A lot of your key defensive pieces in UVS are typically printed on foundations found at like common and rare slots. This means that in a draft where you're primarily playing with commons and some rares, you have access to all of the defensive pieces and none of the offensive ones, which makes defense not only extremely strong and limited, but a little too easy to access. This also means that they can kind of cook formats by accidentally printing the wrong characters. If they design a character that is built to be tanky and constructed, this means they'll be borderline unkillable in draft because they'll not only have access to all of their defensive pieces that make them tanky, but their opponents will have access to none of the high-powered attacks that are meant to blow them up. So they have to be really careful about which characters they print in sets, which luckily it seems they're taking steps to do this by printing characters at different rarities. While characters have their own rare slot, and there's always a character in every pack, the characters will appear at different rates, with common characters appearing more frequently, and those being more lower powered meant to help facilitate draft, and the more either too strong for limited or more like gimmicky characters that require very specific cards to make their decks work are printed at rare, so you encounter them a little less frequently while you're drafting. And while that's nice, it doesn't quite stop some defensive characters from just being giga broken if you open them. I don't know, UVS draft is just kind of messy and really hard to talk about without like extensive playtesting, which is something that I hope to do one day, but something I just can't facilitate right now. Like, I don't know 7 other UVS players that would be down to even draft at all. But while UVS draft has some very clear problems that are in need of solutions, I have faith that those solutions can be found because, you know, if a game like Flesh and Blood can make itself draftable, I see no reason for UVS to not be able to figure it out, despite all of its problems. To me, the symbol thing seems fine, having sets with characters with 3 symbols, having cards with all 3 of that character's symbols on them, attuned cards that can be played in that character no matter what symbol you choose, and then the symbol choosing only really mattering for what other characters' cards you are stealing to put into your deck. That feels like good math to me, but it's something that I can't really tell until I really get my hands on a set and draft it a bunch and really crunch the numbers. So until then, that one remains to be seen as a problem, but some of the other problems I think are very much solvable. The first problem, unfortunately, is that either we need to increase the pack size, or make it so that we can draft with 30 cards. I think there might be a way to do it. We need to steal Magic the Gathering's land thing, where you don't actually play all of the cards you draft into your deck, you only need to put a selection of them into your deck, and then the rest is padded out with extra cards you add after the fact. One idea is you take Flesh and Blood's Cracked Bauble, which is a generic card you can just add an infinite amount of copies of to your deck to get it up to the legal deck limit, but the Cracked Bauble card itself is really horrible, and putting one in your deck is actually more of a punishment, and will often end up having you lose games because you draw it. Maybe UVS can add some kind of generic rainbow symbol foundation that isn't horrible, and is just some kind of spam that people can add to their deck to get the deck padded up. But I think it would be really cool to crib some notes from Exceed, where in Exceed, it's not a TCG, all the decks come pre-constructed, and every character's deck has their character's unique cards and special moves, but also a core of basic attacks that every single character has that kind of forms like the skeleton of the game. Stealing that and putting that in the draft would be really cool, where like at the beginning of the draft, everyone gets a like draft pack, where you kind of just have to buy it once and you have it forever. And it's this like generic starting deck that you add the cards that you draft to. And it can be a set of like, it's just a set of basic moves. Say like a 15 card deck of like 3 copies of a foundation in every block zone that's easy to play, and then like a generic punch and generic kick attack. And it's something that everyone has as a core that then all the cards they draft are kind of built into, and the decks are more built around. And, you know, if 15 cards is enough, you can bump it up, put in some more foundations, more attacks. But it's this, like, core set of basic cards to make your deck functional. And then the things you draft are really, like, what make the deck unique and make the strategy sing and really, like, get the ball rolling. But you have a core foundation of just, like, spammable foundations to get you going. A good variety of block zones, so you're not just going to get blown out because you forgot to draft lows, and some generic attacks that can either be like string starters or more like string filler that are kind of just like safe to play whenever. But you still need a 40 card deck, and 10 cards per pack is still not a lot. That's only 30 drafted cards. So like, to be able to make a good enough amount of cuts, you need to be able to cut at the bare minimum a third. So you'd add 20 cards to your deck, so maybe you do like a 20 card core deck, but then like the half of your deck is the generic core cards, so that doesn't feel great. So yeah, the ideas still need a lot of work, but I think there's something there, and I think it is worth putting effort into. Like, I've appreciated reading the articles I've read that have talked about how they've made more of an effort to make draft a real format, and I hope to see that effort continued forward despite the player base's lack of interest. I think draft is a really good format, and when it's executed well, can be incredible. The problem being is you have to execute it well, which is tough. Not to try to make the argument that, like, draft is only good when it's good, but more so that, like, if we were debating what is better, cake versus ice cream, and I said, well, what if someone leaves the cake in the oven too long and burns it? Well, then, yeah, obviously the cake is going to taste bad and the ice cream is going to be better. When we're talking about, like, how good cake is, it's sort of implied that the cake is properly cooked in the first place. Similarly to talking about how good draft is, we're kind of assuming that the draft format is properly integrated in the first place. Obviously, a bad draft format is a bad format. Just the same way that I can say, like, a tier 0 format makes a constructed format bad. That doesn't make, like, constructed as a format bad. That just makes that specific format not great. So I do think there is potential for UVS to have a good draft format. It kind of has, like, the necessary pieces to make the draft itself interesting with the symbols and the characters and how you can like weave through different symbols and you can mine them and mix them, match them in different ways to create new strategies. It's more so just on a design thing to facilitate it and make it sort of like functional, sort of with a flesh and blood thing of you have to like intentionally design for it, of course, but like make sure that it's feasible in the first place. Like there are a lot of games out there that just kind of like go, yeah, we have the rules for you to draft, but no one does it because the game isn't built for it. Like, sure, you could draft Pokemon, but it would never work or be a fun format because the packs are like 90% Pokemon and a deck is like 10% Pokemon. So you're just like not getting the amount of cards you need to build a functioning strategy. So that is something that kind of needs to be like built in first, and like then you can figure out, is the format good or not? Sort of. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm rambling at this point. But with all that said, the light at the end of the tunnel is that any game can be draftable if you want to make it so. It is more so just on the ingenuity of the player base through the greatest format ever called Cube. And I've been told there are a lot of Universus cubes that are really cool, which, you know, gives me hope that maybe one day we can get an actual draftable format. For those of you that don't know, Cube is just draft, except instead of buying booster packs to draft from, you construct your own set of cards that are then drafted from. It's sort of like building your own set. It's really cool and is one of the greatest formats of all time, and you can use it to make games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and Vanguard and like WeCross super draftable and super fun. A lot of the reasons these games aren't draftable is primarily due to the fact that the pack structure is just like not really built to support it. But when you get to choose exactly which cards go in the cube and how many cards per pack each player gets, you're able to construct some pretty incredible draft formats. So if you love draft, but your favorite game doesn't support it, just go on YouTube and look up like your favorite game and type in cube. 92% of the time, you'll be able to find some kind of resource for it. And if not, maybe ask around in whatever your game's Discord is, or just invent it yourself. I honestly didn't expect this to become a shout out to Cube video, but honestly, like Cube is probably the single greatest format ever invented. But I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling at this point. So if you like this video, let me know down in the comments if you want more just kind of like rambly whatever videos. Maybe I'll make a video on draft one day. It's actually not a bad idea. When the Tekken 8 set drops, maybe I'll do a draft video. But yeah, that's enough of me talking. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one.